The screaming started before Jake Thompson even hit the ground. He lay twisted in the fresh powder, his right leg bent at an angle that made the ski patrol officer turn away. The pain shot through his body like lightning, but worse than the physical agony was the sound of his own voice, raw and desperate, echoing across the Colorado mountainside. Blood seeped through his designer ski pants, staining the pristine white snow a deep crimson. "Don't move him," someone shouted from above. "His leg is completely shattered." Jake had been skiing the expert slopes at Aspen since he was 6 years old. The mountain was like his backyard, familiar and safe. But today, something had gone terribly wrong. A patch of ice hidden beneath the powder had sent him careening into a cluster of pine trees at 30 miles per hour. The helicopter ride down the mountain blurred together in a haze of morphine and panic. Jake caught glimpses of his father's face, pale and drawn, as they rushed him into Denver General Hospital. The heir to Thomson Technologies, the company that had revolutionized social media platforms, was supposed to be invincible. His father had always told him that money could fix anything. But money could not fix the titanium rods now holding his femur together. Money could not erase the doctor's words about permanent damage and a lifetime of mobility issues. Money could not take back the moment when Jake realized his leg would never be the same. "You will need crutches for at least 6 months, Dr. Patterson explained, her voice gentle but firm. "After that, we can evaluate whether you might need a cane long-term. The physical therapy will be intensive, but with your resources, you can afford the best specialists in the country." Jake stared at the ceiling of his private hospital room, the weight of her words settling like stones in his chest. At 21, he had planned to graduate from Stanford in 2 months, then join his father's company as the youngest vice president in their history. He had been planning to propose to his girlfriend, Madison, with his grandmother's ring at their spring formal. Those dreams felt as broken as his leg. Madison visited twice during his 3-week hospital stay. Both times, she seemed uncomfortable, her eyes darting to the crutches leaning against his bedside table. During their second visit, she twisted her engagement ring and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, I need to be honest with you," she said, her perfectly manicured fingers nervous against her designer purse. "I do not think I can handle this. The crutches, the uncertainty about your future, all of it. I thought I could, but I cannot." She left the ring on his bedside table. His Stanford friends stopped calling after the first few weeks. The fraternity brothers, who had once competed for his attention, suddenly had excuses for why they could not visit. Jake realized that many of his friendships had been built on his status, his ability to throw expensive parties and take everyone on lavish trips. Now, listening to the steady beep of his heart monitor, Jake faced a truth he had never considered. When stripped of his athletic ability and forced to rely on crutches, he discovered how shallow his world had been. The people he had thought cared about him had only cared about what he could provide. Sitting in his father's mansion in Cherry Hills Village after his release from the hospital, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the snow-capped Rockies and realized he needed to discover who he really was beneath the Thompson name and fortune. "Dad, I want to finish college somewhere else," he announced over dinner that evening. Richard Thompson set down his wine glass, his expression stern. "Jake, you have 1 semester left at Stanford. Your future at the company depends on that degree." "I need to do this my way," Jake replied, adjusting his position as his leg throbbed. "I want to go somewhere no one knows who I am. I want to see what life is like for normal people, especially people who face challenges like mine." His father's face softened slightly. The accident had changed him too, made him realize how close he had come to losing his only son. "Where do you want to go?" "Austin Community College has an excellent business program," Jake said. "I can transfer my credits and graduate with an associate degree. It will give me time to figure out who I am, without the Thompson name opening every door." Richard Thompson built his empire by understanding people, and he recognized the determination in his son's voice. "If that's what you need, I'll make the arrangements. But promise me you will be careful. The world is not always kind to people who are different." Jake nodded, not fully understanding how prophetic his father's words would prove to be. 2 weeks later, Jake sat in his modest apartment near the Austin Community College campus, staring at his crutches leaning against the wall. He had enrolled under the name Jake Taylor, using his mother's maiden name. His bank account contained enough money for rent and basic expenses, but nothing that would reveal his true identity. Tomorrow, he would start classes as an ordinary student. He would navigate crowded hallways, carry his own books, and stand in line for cafeteria food like everyone else. For the first time in his life, he would experience what it meant to be truly independent. He had no idea how much his life was about to change, or that a girl named Grace Miller would soon show him the difference between wealth and richness, between being served and being seen, between having everything and having what truly matters. The adventure was just beginning, but first Jake had to learn how to walk through a world that seemed designed for people who did not need the support he now required. His crutches would become more than just medical equipment. They would become the bridge to discovering his authentic self. What do you think Jake will discover about himself when no one knows he is rich? Comment below and subscribe to see how this story unfolds. You will not believe what happens next. Jake's first day at Austin Community College started at 5 in the morning when his alarm buzzed him awake in his small studio apartment. The place was a far cry from his suite at Stanford or his bedroom in Cherry Hills Village. The walls were thin, the air conditioning wheezed, and the carpet had stains that told stories he preferred not to imagine. But it was his, earned with his own name and his own modest bank account. Getting ready took longer than he had anticipated. Simple tasks like showering and getting dressed became complex puzzles when balanced on one good leg. His crutches leaned against every surface as he moved through his morning routine, and by the time he was ready to leave, sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. The August heat in Austin hit him like a wall when he stepped outside. Texas summers were different from Colorado weather, thick and humid in a way that made his crutches slip against his palms. The campus shuttle stop was 3 blocks away, and Jake realized he had underestimated how challenging the walk would be. Students passed him on the sidewalk, their backpacks slung casually over their shoulders, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming classes. A few glanced at his crutches with brief curiosity before looking away. Jake had never been invisible before, but he was beginning to understand what it felt like. The shuttle arrived packed with early morning students heading to campus. Jake watched as people filed aboard, taking seats and standing in the aisles. When his turn came, he struggled up the steps, his crutches awkward in the narrow space. "Excuse me," he said to the driver, "is there a place I can sit? My leg is injured, and standing is difficult." The driver barely looked up from his newspaper. "First come, first served, buddy. Maybe try the next one." A teenage girl with bright purple hair looked up from her phone. She started to stand, then noticed her friends watching and settled back into her seat. An older woman near the front shifted her purse to the seat beside her and stared out the window. Jake stood in the swaying bus, gripping his crutches and trying to maintain his balance as they navigated the Austin streets. Each bump sent pain shooting through his healing leg, and he realized this was just the beginning of his day. Austin Community College spread across several blocks, a collection of modern buildings connected by sidewalks and courtyards. Jake had studied the campus map, but navigating it with crutches proved more challenging than he had anticipated. Distances that seemed short on paper stretched endlessly when every step required careful placement and balance. His first class, Introduction to Business Ethics, was on the 3rd floor of the main academic building. The elevator was broken, according to a handwritten sign taped to the doors. Jake stared at the 3 flights of stairs ahead of him, calculating the time and effort required to climb them. "Rough break," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a maintenance worker in his 50s, holding a toolbox and wearing a sympathetic expression. "Been meaning to fix that elevator for weeks, but parts are back-ordered." "Is there another way up?" Jake asked. The man shook his head. "Sorry, kid. Stairs are it. Though I have seen people on crutches make it up before. Just takes time." Jake began the climb, pausing on each landing to catch his breath and adjust his grip on the crutches. Students passed him easily, taking the stairs 2 at a time while he struggled with each individual step. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, class had already started. Professor Martinez looked up as Jake entered the classroom, the sound of his crutches announcing his arrival to 30 pairs of eyes. "Welcome. Please take any available seat." The only empty seats were in the middle of rows, requiring Jake to squeeze past other students with his crutches. He watched faces change from curiosity to annoyance as he disrupted the flow of the lecture. One student sighed dramatically as Jake accidentally bumped his desk with a crutch. "Sorry," Jake whispered, finally settling into a seat near the back. "As I was saying," Professor Martinez continued, "ethical business practices require us to consider how our decisions affect all stakeholders, especially those with less power or resources." Jake opened his notebook, but his hands were shaking from the exertion of climbing the stairs. The pen slipped from his fingers, rolling under the chair of the student in front of him. When he leaned forward to retrieve it, his crutch fell with a loud clatter. The student in front of him turned around with an expression of irritation. "Seriously, dude, can you try to keep it together?" Heat flooded Jake's face. At Stanford, people had competed to sit near him, to be part of his study groups, to benefit from his connections. He was just an inconvenience, a disruption to be tolerated at best. After class, Jake made his way slowly toward the cafeteria. His leg throbbed, and the Texas heat had left him dehydrated and exhausted. The student center buzzed with activity, as hundreds of students grabbed lunch between classes. The cafeteria operated on a self-service model. Students selected their food, placed it on trays, and carried everything to tables or the checkout line. Jake stared at the setup, realizing he faced an impossible puzzle. He could not carry a tray while using crutches. He approached the serving area cautiously, watching other students move efficiently through the line. When his turn came, he selected a sandwich and a bottle of water, then stared at the tray in front of him. "You going to move or what?" asked the student behind him, a large young man in a football jersey. "I need help carrying this," Jake said. "I cannot manage the tray with my crutches." The football player looked at Jake's crutches, then at the line of students forming behind them. "Not my problem, man. Figure it out." Jake tried balancing the tray on one hand while using his crutches, but it was impossible. Food scattered as the tray tilted, sending his sandwich sliding across the floor. Laughter rippled through the nearby students. "Clean up on aisle 3, someone called out mockingly. A cafeteria worker appeared with a mop, her expression weary. "You cannot bring crutches through the line if you cannot carry a tray," she said. "It is a safety issue." Jake stared at the mess on the floor, his sandwich destroyed, his pride in pieces alongside it. At Stanford, he had never even carried his own tray. Fraternity pledges and eager classmates had competed for the privilege of helping him with anything he needed. He left the cafeteria hungry and humiliated, finding a bench outside where he could sit and process what had just happened. Students walked past, laughing and chatting with their friends, carrying their lunch trays with effortless ease. For the first time since his accident, Jake truly understood what his father had meant about the world not being kind to people who were different. His crutches had transformed him from someone who commanded attention and respect to someone who was seen as an inconvenience, a problem to be avoided. That evening, in his small apartment, Jake called his father. "How was your first day?" Richard Thompson asked. Jake hesitated, tempted to ask his father to wire money so he could return to his old life. But something held him back, a stubborn determination to see this through. "Educational," Jake finally replied. "I am learning things they never taught at Stanford." He did not mention the stairs, the cafeteria, or the way students looked through him as if he was invisible. He did not tell his father about the loneliness that pressed against him in the quiet apartment, or how much he missed being someone who mattered. Instead, he set his alarm for 4:30 the next morning, giving himself extra time to navigate the challenges he now knew awaited him. Tomorrow, he would try again. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to get lunch without making a scene. What Jake did not know was that tomorrow would bring Grace Miller into his life, and with her, a lesson about the difference between being served and being seen, between commanding respect and earning it, between having power over people and finding power within himself. The real education was just beginning. 3 weeks into the semester, Jake had developed strategies for navigating his new world. He arrived at campus an hour early to avoid crowded elevators. He carried a lightweight backpack instead of heavy textbooks. He had even convinced one professor to move their class to the first floor after explaining his situation. But the cafeteria remained his greatest challenge. Every day around noon, Jake would stand at the entrance to the student center, watching hundreds of students flow through the lunch line with their trays, laughing and socializing as they found seats with friends. His stomach would growl, reminding him that the energy bar he had eaten for breakfast was long gone. Some days, he would buy a sandwich from the vending machine and eat it alone on a bench outside. Other days, he would skip lunch entirely, waiting until he got home to eat something from his small refrigerator. The weight was starting to come off his already lean frame, but he told himself it was just part of the adjustment. On this particular Tuesday, Jake's morning had been especially difficult. His leg was having a bad day, sending sharp pains up his thigh with each step. He had dropped his textbook twice climbing the stairs to his sociology class, and a group of students had gotten impatient waiting for him to navigate a crowded hallway. By lunchtime, Jake was exhausted, hungry, and fighting the urge to call his father and ask to come home. He stood at the cafeteria entrance, watching the familiar scene unfold. Students moved through the line effortlessly, balancing trays loaded with food, chatting with friends, completely unaware of how easy their lives were. "Just do it," Jake muttered to himself. "Ask someone for help." He had tried this approach before, always with the same result. People were busy, rushing to meet friends or get back to class. They did not have time to help someone they did not know, especially someone who reminded them that life could be unpredictable and unfair. Jake entered the cafeteria and approached a girl near his age who was loading her tray with salad. She had blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and wore scrubs, suggesting she was in the nursing program. "Excuse me," Jake said politely. "I wonder if you could help me carry a tray to a table. I am having trouble managing it with these." He gestured to his crutches. The girl looked at his crutches, then at her watch. "Sorry, I have a clinical rotation in 20 minutes. I really cannot be late." She hurried away, without making eye contact. Jake tried again with a group of guys from his business ethics class. They recognized him as the student who had disrupted their first day with his crutches. "Hey, could one of you help me carry a lunch tray?" Jake asked. "Just to get it to a table." One of them laughed. "Dude, we are not your personal servants. Figure it out like everyone else." They walked away, leaving Jake standing alone in the middle of the bustling cafeteria. Heat flooded his face. At Stanford, these same students would have been competing to help him, hoping to gain favor with the heir to Thomson Technologies. Now, he was just an inconvenience, someone to be avoided. Jake was about to leave when he noticed her. She stood behind the serving counter, wearing the standard cafeteria uniform and a name tag that read Grace. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face showed the kind of tiredness that came from working long hours. She was refilling the soup containers, moving efficiently but carefully, as if every motion was practiced and purposeful. What struck Jake was how she looked at the students she served. While other cafeteria workers went through the motions mechanically, Grace made eye contact, smiled genuinely, and seemed to actually see each person as an individual. Jake watched as an international student approached his station, clearly struggling with English as he tried to ask about the ingredients in different dishes. Instead of showing impatience, Grace took extra time to explain each option, even writing down the names of dishes he might enjoy. When an obviously stressed student ahead of Jake started crying while trying to decide what to buy with her limited meal card balance, Grace quietly slipped an extra roll onto her tray without charging for it. "It is on the house, honey," Grace said softly. "Everyone needs a little extra comfort food sometimes." Jake found himself in Grace's line almost without realizing it. When his turn came, she looked at him with the same genuine attention she had given every other student. "What can I get for you today?" she asked. Her voice warmed despite the obvious fatigue in her eyes. "Just a sandwich and some soup," Jake replied, then hesitated. "Actually, I need to ask for help. I cannot carry a tray with my crutches." Grace looked at his crutches, then back at his face. Instead of the impatience or discomfort he had grown accustomed to seeing, her expression showed simple understanding. "Of course," she said. "Where would you like to sit?" "You do not have to," Jake started, surprised by her immediate willingness to help. "It is no problem at all," Grace said, already loading his tray with food. "I get a break in a few minutes anyway." She carried his tray to a table near the window, then returned to get her own simple lunch, a small salad and a cup of coffee. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. These tables are meant to be shared anyway. Jake nodded, still processing her kindness. At Stanford, help had always come with expectations or strings attached. Grace seemed to offer assistance as naturally as breathing. "I am Grace Miller," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "Jake Taylor," he replied, using his assumed identity. "Thank you for this. I have been having trouble getting lunch for weeks." Grace's eyes widened. "Weeks? You have been skipping meals." Jake shrugged, embarrassed. "It is not a big deal. I eat at home." "It is a big deal," Grace said firmly. "Food is fuel. How are you supposed to focus on your studies if you are hungry all the time?" She spoke with an authority that surprised him, as if nutrition and taking care of oneself were subjects she knew intimately. "What happened to your leg?" Grace asked gently. "Skiing accident," Jake replied. "Doctors say I will need crutches for several more months, maybe longer." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "My little brother broke his leg when he was 12. Fell out of a tree trying to rescue a cat. He was on crutches for 4 months, and I remember how hard everything became for him. Simple things like carrying his backpack or getting lunch at school." "How did he manage?" Jake asked. "Family helped," Grace said. "And teachers. And friends. Sometimes you just need people to see you as more than your limitations." They ate in comfortable conversation. Grace asked about his classes and shared stories about her own studies in business administration. She was working toward an associate degree while helping support her family, she explained, though she did not elaborate on the details. What struck Jake was how she listened. Really listened. She asked follow-up questions about his professors and seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts about his coursework. When he mentioned struggling with the physical demands of campus life, she offered practical suggestions without making him feel helpless. "The elevator in the academic building should be fixed by next week," she said. "My roommate works in maintenance, and she says they finally got the parts." "That will make a huge difference," Jake said. "And if you want, I can help you carry lunch trays until you figure out a better system," Grace offered. "My schedule varies, but I am usually working during the lunch rush." Jake stared at her, caught off guard by the casual generosity of her offer. "You do not even know me." Grace smiled. "I know you are a student who needs help carrying a tray. That is enough." Her break ended, and Grace returned to work. Jake sat alone at the table, finishing his lunch and watching her serve other students with the same genuine care she had shown him. For the first time since his accident, Jake felt seen rather than pitied, helped rather than served, treated as a person rather than a problem to be solved or avoided. He did not know that Grace worked 2 jobs in addition to her full-time classes, sending most of her earnings home to help support her younger siblings. He did not know that she had skipped her own lunch 3 times that week to help other students who were struggling financially. All Jake knew was that someone had finally looked past his crutches and seen him as a human being worth helping, worth sitting with, worth knowing. Do you think Grace's kindness will change Jake's perspective on life? Comment your thoughts below and subscribe to see how their friendship develops. The next chapter will surprise you. Over the following weeks, Jake's lunch routine transformed completely. Every day around noon, he would make his way to Grace's station in the cafeteria, and she would help carry his tray to whichever table had space available. Sometimes she could join him for her break. Other days, she would just make sure he was settled before returning to work. Jake found himself looking forward to these brief interactions more than any other part of his day. Grace had a way of making ordinary conversation feel meaningful, asking about his classes with genuine interest and sharing her own experiences navigating college as a working student. "How do you do it?" Jake asked one Thursday afternoon as they sat together by the window. "Work here, take a full course load, and still seem so positive about everything." Grace stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I guess I have learned to find good things in small moments. Like when a stressed student smiles after you help them, or when you finally understand a concept you have been struggling with in class." "That sounds like something you have to practice," Jake observed. "It is," Grace admitted. "My mom always said that happiness is not about what happens to you. It is about how you choose to respond to what happens to you." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing her words. At Stanford, happiness had seemed like something he deserved rather than something he chose. When good things happened, he had accepted them as natural. When bad things happened, like his accident, he had felt betrayed by the universe. "Your mom sounds wise," he said. A shadow crossed Grace's face briefly. She was. "She died when I was 16. "I am sorry," Jake said, immediately regretting his comment. "It is okay," Grace said softly. "She taught me a lot before she passed. One of the most important things was that we are all connected, and we have a responsibility to help each other when we can." Jake thought about his own mother, who had died in a car accident when he was 8. He had rarely talked about her, even with close friends, but something about Grace's openness made him want to share. "I lost my mom too," he said quietly. "Car accident when I was young." Grace reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "That changes you, does not it? Losing a parent." Jake nodded. "Makes you realize how quickly everything can change. And how important it is to be kind to people while you can," Grace added. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at a nearby table. A student Jake recognized from his economics class was crying while staring at her phone. Grace immediately stood up. "Katie, what is wrong?" The girl, Katie, looked up with tears streaming down her face. "My car just died in the parking lot. The mechanic says it needs $800 in repairs, and I do not have that kind of money. Without a car, I cannot get to my job, and without my job, I cannot afford to stay in school." Grace sat down next to Katie, her voice calm and soothing. "Okay, let us think through this step by step. Do you have anyone who could give you rides to work temporarily?" Jake watched as Grace spent the next 15 minutes helping Katie brainstorm solutions. She offered to ask around about carpooling opportunities, suggested Katie talk to her professors about temporary accommodations, and even mentioned a mechanic her roommate knew who might work out a payment plan. "Things are going to work out," Grace told Katie as she prepared to return to work. "I have seen people get through much harder situations than this." After Katie left, Jake shook his head in amazement. "You just spent your entire break helping someone you barely know." Grace shrugged. "Katie helps tutor students in math. She volunteers at the literacy center downtown. She is one of those people who makes everyone around her better. Of course I would help her." "But what about you?" Jake asked. "When do you take care of your own problems?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Jake worried he had overstepped. Finally, she spoke. "I have 3 younger siblings back home in Oklahoma," she said. "My dad does construction work when he can find it, but his back is not what it used to be. My brother Tommy is 15 and dreams of going to college, but we all know there is no money for that unless he gets a full scholarship." She continued, her voice steady but soft. "My sister Lucy is 13 and needs glasses, but we have been putting it off because glasses cost $300. And my youngest brother, Sam, is 10 and just wants to play Little League like the other kids, but the registration fee might as well be $1,000 for all we can afford it." Jake felt something tighten in his chest. The amount Grace was talking about, $300 for glasses, was less than he used to spend on a single dinner at Stanford. "So when I see someone like Katie struggling," Grace continued, "I know that helping her is also helping her family, her students, everyone she touches. We are all connected. When we lift each other up, everyone rises." Jake stared at this remarkable young woman who worked multiple jobs to support her family while maintaining excellent grades and still finding time to help everyone around her. He thought about his own complaints over the past few weeks, his frustration with having to ask for help, his sense of being inconvenienced by life. "You amaze me," he said honestly. Grace laughed, but not unkindly. "I am just doing what anyone would do." "No," Jake said firmly. "You are not. Most people would not spend their break helping someone else solve their problems. Most people would not work as hard as you do just to help their family. Most people are not like you." That evening, alone in his apartment, Jake could not stop thinking about Grace's family. He imagined her brother Tommy staying up late studying, dreaming of college but knowing the odds were against him. He thought about Lucy squinting at the blackboard in school, too proud to tell anyone she could not see clearly. He pictured young Sam watching other kids play baseball while he sat on the sidelines. Jake had the power to solve all of Grace's family problems with a single phone call to his father. $300 for glasses, $500 for Little League and equipment, enough money to ensure Tommy could afford college. It was pocket change for the Thompson family. But he also knew that Grace would never accept such help if she knew where it came from. Her pride was not vanity, it was dignity. She wanted to earn her way through life, to help her family through her own hard work and sacrifice. The next day, Jake arrived at the cafeteria with a plan forming in his mind. He would find a way to help Grace and her family without revealing his identity. He would have to be careful, creative, and patient. But first, he wanted to understand more about the person who had shown him such unexpected kindness. Grace had opened her heart to him, shared her struggles and dreams with remarkable honesty. The least he could do was be worthy of that trust. As he approached her station for lunch, Jake realized that Grace was teaching him something his expensive education had never covered: how to see beyond his own needs and recognize the quiet heroism in everyday acts of kindness. She was changing him, one lunch conversation at a time, into someone he actually liked being. Jake began arriving at the cafeteria earlier each day, not just for lunch but to observe Grace throughout her shift. What he discovered amazed him more each day. Grace seemed to have an invisible network of kindness that reached every corner of the campus. She knew which students were struggling financially and would quietly slip extra food onto their trays. She remembered personal details about regular customers, asking about sick relatives and upcoming exams. She celebrated small victories with genuine enthusiasm and offered gentle encouragement during tough times. One morning, Jake watched as Grace noticed Marcus, a veteran student who always ate alone in the corner. She approached his table during her break. "Marcus, I have been meaning to ask you something," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "My roommate mentioned that you help other veterans navigate their benefits. Is that right?" Marcus nodded, surprised by the attention. "I do what I can. The paperwork can be confusing." "Would you be interested in starting a support group?" Grace asked. "I could talk to the Student Services office about getting you a meeting room. There are several veterans on campus who might benefit from having someone who understands their situation." Marcus's face lit up with something Jake had never seen there before: hope. "You would do that?" Marcus asked. "Of course," Grace said. "Everyone deserves to have their service honored and their struggles understood." Later that week, Jake observed Grace approaching Dr. Chen, one of the business professors, after his lecture. "Professor Chen, do you remember Katie from your microeconomics class?" Grace asked. "She is the one who always sits in the front row and asks such thoughtful questions." Dr. Chen nodded. "Excellent student. Very engaged. She is going through a difficult time with transportation," Grace explained carefully. "I wondered if you knew of any work-study opportunities that might help her stay in school." Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, I have been looking for a student assistant to help with research. The pay is modest, but it would look excellent on a resume." Grace's face broke into a radiant smile. "That sounds perfect. Would you mind if I mentioned it to her?" Jake watched these interactions with growing fascination. Grace never made herself the center of attention or took credit for the connections she facilitated. She simply saw needs and found ways to address them, treating each act of kindness as naturally as breathing. But it was during a Thursday afternoon conversation that Jake truly understood the depth of Grace's character. "I have been thinking about what you said about everyone being connected," Jake said as they shared lunch. "But what about when people do not deserve help? What about when they have made bad choices?" Grace considered his question seriously. "I think about my dad sometimes," she said. "After my mom died, he went through a really dark period. Started drinking too much, missed work, made some choices that hurt our family." She paused, stirring her soup absently. "I was angry with him for a long time. Felt like he had abandoned us when we needed him most." "What changed?" Jake asked. "I realized that hurt people often hurt people," Grace said. "My dad was not drinking because he did not love us. He was drinking because he missed my mom so much he could not figure out how to keep living without her." Grace's eyes were distant, remembering. "So instead of staying angry, I started looking for small ways to help him remember who he was before the grief took over. I would leave his favorite coffee by the door before he went to work. I would ask him to help me with homework, giving him reasons to feel needed. I would tell him stories about things Tommy and Lucy and Sam had done, reminding him that we still needed our dad." "Did it work?" Jake asked softly. Grace smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. It took time, but yes. He has been sober for 3 years now. He still misses Mom every day, but he has learned how to carry that love forward instead of letting it drag him down. Jake stared at this remarkable young woman who had somehow found the wisdom and strength to save her family through patience and love. You were just a teenager dealing with your own grief. Grief is not something you get over, Grace said. It is something you learn to carry. And it is easier to carry when you are not carrying it alone. That evening, Jake called his father. How are your studies going? Richard Thompson asked. I am learning more than I expected, Jake replied. Dad, can I ask you something? After Mom died, how did you keep going? There was a long pause. You have never asked me about that before. I know. I think I was not ready to hear the answer until now. Richard's voice grew soft. The first year was the hardest thing I have ever experienced. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. But work did not heal the hole in my heart. What did? Jake asked. You, his father said simply. Watching you grow, seeing your mother's kindness reflected in your eyes, knowing that the best parts of her lived on in you. That gave me a reason to keep building something meaningful. Jake felt tears he had not expected. I never knew you saw Mom in me. Every day, Richard said. Especially in the way you care about people. Your mother always said that our wealth was not about what we could buy for ourselves, but about what we could do for others. After hanging up, Jake sat in his small apartment thinking about legacy, about the difference between inheriting money and inheriting values. His mother had died when he was young, but Grace was showing him that her influence lived on in ways he had never recognized. Grace was helping him understand that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with how you treated people, especially those who could do nothing for you in return. The next day, Jake made a decision. He would find a way to help Grace's family, but he would do it in a way that honored her values rather than his resources. He would have to be creative, patient, and careful. But first, he needed to understand more about Grace's world. He decided to ask her something he had been curious about for weeks. Grace, he said as they sat down for lunch, would you mind if I asked you about your family? You mention them sometimes, but I would love to know more about them. Grace's face brightened immediately. I would love to tell you about them. They are the best people I know. As she began sharing stories about Tommy's academic achievements, Luce's artistic talents, and Sam's boundless energy, Jake realized he was not just learning about Grace's family. He was learning about the people who had shaped Grace into someone who could see past his crutches and his awkwardness to the person he was becoming. And he was beginning to understand that helping Grace's family would not just be an act of charity. It would be an investment in the kind of person he wanted to be. Jake spent the next week researching scholarships, grants, and programs that might benefit Grace's family. He discovered a world of assistance he had never known existed. Need-based scholarships for academic achievers like Tommy, programs that provided free eye exams and glasses for children like Lucy, and community organizations that sponsored youth sports for kids like Sam. The challenge was finding ways to connect Grace's family to these resources without raising suspicion about how he had obtained such detailed information. Jake's first opportunity came when Grace mentioned that Tommy was struggling to find information about college scholarships for students in rural Oklahoma. The guidance counselor at his school is overwhelmed, Grace explained during their lunch. She has 300 students and Tommy is just one of them. He is smart enough to earn scholarships, but he does not know where to look or how to apply. Jake had spent the previous evening researching Oklahoma-based scholarship programs. I have a friend who went through something similar, he said carefully. She found this organization called Oklahoma Futures that specifically helps first-generation college students. They have mentors who help with applications and essay writing. Grace's eyes widened with interest. Really? Do you think they might work with students from Tommy's area? I could call them and ask, Jake offered. If you want, I could get some information for you to pass along to Tommy. That would be amazing, Grace said. Tommy is so bright, but he gets discouraged because everything seems impossible when you do not know where to start. That evening, Jake called Oklahoma Futures directly. He explained that he knew a deserving student who needed guidance, and within minutes, he was connected to Maria Santos, a program coordinator. We love working with motivated students from rural areas, Maria explained. If Tommy is interested, I could set up a video call to discuss his options. We have several scholarship programs specifically designed for students in his situation. Jake arranged for Maria to call Tommy directly, then passed the information to Grace, explaining that his friend had recommended Tommy based on Grace's descriptions of her brother's academic potential. When Grace called home that evening to share the news, Jake could hear her excitement from across the cafeteria where he was studying. Tommy was so shocked that someone believed in him enough to make a recommendation, Grace told Jake the next day. Maria spent an hour on the phone with him, helping him understand the application process. She thinks he has an excellent chance at several scholarships. Jake felt a warmth he had never experienced from any business deal or acquisition his family had ever completed. Helping Tommy cost nothing but time and attention, yet the impact was immeasurable. His next project involved Lucy's need for glasses. Grace had mentioned that her sister was falling behind in school because she could not see the board clearly, but the family could not afford an eye exam, let alone glasses. Jake researched vision programs and discovered that Lions Club International sponsored a program called Sight First that provided free eye exams and glasses for children in need. He learned that a local Lions Club chapter in Grace's hometown was actively seeking referrals. I read an article about programs that help kids get glasses, Jake mentioned casually during lunch. There is something called Lions Club Sight First that might be worth looking into for Lucy. Grace looked up from her sandwich with immediate interest. Tell me more. Jake explained what he had learned, being careful to present it as information he had stumbled across rather than something he had specifically researched. Grace took notes on everything he said. This could be exactly what Lucy needs, she said. If this program is legitimate, it could change everything for her academically. The article mentioned that they prefer referrals from teachers or counselors, Jake added. Maybe Lucy's teacher could make the connection. That evening, Grace called her sister's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who was thrilled to learn about the program. Within a week, Lucy had been scheduled for a free eye exam, and the Lions Club had committed to providing glasses at no cost to the family. Lucy called me crying yesterday, Grace told Jake. But they were happy tears. She said she could finally see the board in math class, and suddenly everything makes sense. Jake's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Such a small thing, he thought. $300 that his family would never miss, but for Lucy, it meant the difference between struggling and succeeding in school. His project for Sam proved more creative. Grace had mentioned that her youngest brother desperately wanted to play Little League, but the registration fees, equipment costs, and transportation expenses made it impossible for the family. Jake researched youth baseball programs and discovered that many communities had sponsored child programs funded by local businesses and individuals. He found the contact information for the Little League coordinator in Grace's hometown and called anonymously. I am interested in sponsoring a child for this season, Jake explained to the coordinator, Betty Wilson. I would prefer to remain anonymous, but I would like to cover registration, equipment, and any other costs for a deserving child. Betty was delighted. We have several children who could benefit from sponsorship. Do you have anyone specific in mind? I heard about a boy named Sam Miller whose family is working hard but struggling financially, Jake said. His older sister is in college, and I understand he is a good kid who just wants a chance to play. Sam Miller, Betty said immediately. I know that family. Grace has been such an inspiration to our whole community, working so hard to get herself through college. Sam is a sweet boy, and his father works construction. They are exactly the kind of family our sponsor program is designed to help. Within days, Sam had been enrolled in Little League with full sponsorship for equipment, uniforms, and team fees. The anonymous benefactor had even arranged for transportation to practices and games through the program's volunteer network. Sam cannot stop talking about baseball, Grace told Jake with tears in her eyes. He practices in the backyard every evening, and he sleeps with his glove. He keeps saying he cannot believe someone would be so kind to a kid they have never met. Jake had to excuse himself to the restroom to compose himself. The joy in Grace's voice, the knowledge that Sam was falling asleep happy, the understanding that his family's money could create such profound impacts on deserving people, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. But it was Grace's response that taught him the most important lesson. All these wonderful things happening to my family, Grace said during their next lunch. It makes me want to do even more for other people. When you receive kindness, it multiplies inside you until you have to pass it on. She had used her employee discount to buy extra sandwiches for students she knew were struggling with food security. She had organized a study group for international students who needed help with English. She had connected 3 different students with work study opportunities through her network of professors and staff. My family is being blessed, Grace explained. The least I can do is make sure those blessings keep flowing to other people who need them. Jake realized that by helping Grace's family, he had not just solved their immediate problems. He had given Grace additional capacity to help others, creating a ripple effect of kindness that would touch dozens of lives. And he was learning something his business education had never taught him, that true wealth was not about accumulating resources, but about using resources to create more kindness in the world. Are you amazed by how small acts of kindness can create such big changes? Subscribe and comment to see how Jake's secret generosity transforms not just Grace's family, but his own understanding of what really matters in life. March arrived in Austin with unexpected warmth, bringing spring flowers and the anticipation of semester finals. Jake had settled into a routine that centered around his daily lunch conversations with Grace, their friendship deepening with each shared meal and story. Grace seemed lighter these days, her smile coming more easily as she shared updates about her family's improving circumstances. Tommy was working with his scholarship mentor and had already been accepted to the University of Oklahoma with a partial academic scholarship. Lucy was thriving in school now that she could see clearly, and her grades had improved dramatically. Sam had become the star pitcher of his Little League team, his confidence growing with each game. Sometimes I feel like we are living in a fairy tale, Grace told Jake one afternoon. All these good things happening at once, just when we needed them most. Jake smiled, stirring his soup to avoid her eyes. Maybe good things happen to good people more often than we realize. I hope so, Grace said, because people like you give me faith that the world is full of more kindness than we usually see. Their conversation was interrupted by Grace's phone buzzing urgently. She glanced at it and immediately stood up, her face pale. I have to take this, she said, stepping away from the table. Jake could see her through the window, pacing back and forth as she spoke rapidly into the phone. When she returned, her hands were shaking. Grace, what is wrong? Jake asked. Grace sat down heavily, staring at her phone as if it might ring again at any moment. That was my dad. Sam collapsed at baseball practice. They think it might be his appendix, but they need to do surgery right away. Jake felt his stomach drop. Which hospital? St. Francis in Tulsa, Grace said, her voice mechanical. Dad is driving him there now. The coach said Sam was pitching and suddenly doubled over screaming. Grace stood up abruptly, then sat back down, then stood again. I need to get home. I need to be there. Of course you do, Jake said. What can I do to help? Grace was already calculating in her head. The bus to Oklahoma City takes 6 hours, then I would need to find a way to Tulsa. Or I could try to rent a car, but I do not have a credit card with enough limit. She pulled out her wallet and quickly counted the cash inside. I have $130. That is not enough for a rental car and gas. Jake watched Grace spiral into panic, her usual calm composure cracking under the weight of family crisis and financial constraints. Every instinct told him to solve this problem immediately. He could call his father and have a private jet on the ground at Austin Borgstrom within hours. He could transfer enough money to Grace's account to cover any expense she might face. But he knew Grace would never accept that level of help from someone she thought was a fellow struggling student. Let me think, Jake said, his mind racing through options. Do you have any friends with cars who could drive you? Everyone I know is either in class or working, Grace said. And I cannot ask someone to drive 8 hours round trip for my family emergency. Jake made a decision. I can drive you. Grace stared at him. Jake, you do not even have a car. Jake's mind was still racing. I can rent one. I have a credit card with enough limit. I cannot let you spend that money, Grace protested. And what about your classes? Grace, Jake said firmly, your 10-year-old brother is having emergency surgery. Nothing else matters right now. Grace's eyes filled with tears. But why would you do that? You barely know my family. I know you, Jake said simply. And I know how much they mean to you. That is enough. Within an hour, Jake had rented a reliable sedan and loaded Grace's hastily packed overnight bag into the trunk. Grace had called her supervisor to explain the family emergency and arranged for coverage of her shifts. She sat in the passenger seat, checking her phone every few minutes for updates from her father. The surgery should start within the next 2 hours, she reported as they merged onto Interstate 35 heading north. Dad said Sam was scared but trying to be brave. Jake kept the car slightly above the speed limit, but not enough to risk getting pulled over. Every mile felt crucial, and he found himself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Tell me about Sam, Jake said, hoping to distract Grace from her worry. What is he like when he is not pitching? Grace's face softened slightly. He is the sweetest kid you have ever met. He reads to our neighbor's dog because he thinks the dog gets lonely. He saves half his allowance to buy birthday presents for the rest of us. And he has never met a person he could not make friends with. She continued sharing Sam's stories as they drove through the Texas Hill Country, and Jake could hear the love and pride in her voice. Sam was clearly the baby of the family, protected and cherished by his older siblings. He was so excited about making the All-Star team, Grace said quietly. He has been practicing extra every day, determined to be the best pitcher he could be. He will be fine, Jake said, though he knew they were both thinking about complications, about worst-case scenarios, about how quickly life could change. They reached Oklahoma City as the sun was setting, then navigated the final 2 hours to Tulsa in growing darkness. Grace directed Jake through the city streets to St. Francis Hospital, her local knowledge guiding them efficiently through unfamiliar territory. The surgery waiting room was exactly like every hospital waiting room Jake had ever seen: uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with cafeteria coffee. Grace's father, Bill Miller, stood up as they approached. He was a tall, lean man with calloused hands and worried eyes that lit up when he saw his daughter. "Grace, honey," he said, pulling her into a hug that lasted a long time. "Thank God you are here." "How is Sam?" Grace asked immediately. "Surgery went well," Bill said, relief evident in his voice. "Appendix was starting to rupture, but they got it in time. Doctor says he will be sore for a few days, but he should make a full recovery." Grace sagged against her father, the tension finally leaving her body. "Can we see him?" "He is still waking up from anesthesia," Bill said. "Maybe in another hour." It was then that Bill noticed Jake standing slightly apart, unsure of his place in this family moment. Grace turned to include him. "Dad, this is my friend Jake Taylor from college. He drove me here." Bill extended his hand to Jake, his grip firm and grateful. "Bill Miller, I cannot begin to thank you for bringing Grace home. This means everything to our family." "I was happy to help," Jake said, and meant it completely. As they settled in to wait, Jake observed the Miller family dynamics. Tommy arrived from his part-time job at a grocery store, a serious-looking teenager with his sister's thoughtful eyes. Lucy came with a neighbor who had offered to drive her, a 13-year-old girl whose new glasses had indeed transformed her from squinting uncertainty to clear-eyed confidence. What struck Jake was how naturally they supported each other. No one complained about the long wait, the uncomfortable chairs, or the disruption to their evening plans. They simply gathered around Grace and Bill, sharing updates and reassurances, creating a circle of love and protection around their family crisis. When they were finally allowed to see Sam, Jake stayed in the waiting room to give the family privacy. Through the window, he could see them gathered around a small bed, Grace holding her little brother's hand while he smiled sleepily at his audience. Later, as visiting hours ended and they prepared to find a hotel for the night, Grace approached Jake with tears in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You dropped everything to drive me home to my family. You have never even met Sam, but you cared enough to help." Jake thought about all the ways his family's money could have solved this crisis more efficiently, all the resources he could have deployed to make everything easier. But he realized that what Grace needed was not his wealth. She needed his presence, his willingness to show up when things were difficult, his friendship when it mattered most. "That is what friends do," Jake said. "They show up." But as they checked into a modest motel near the hospital, Jake knew that Grace's family crisis had changed something fundamental in their relationship. He had seen her vulnerability, her fierce love for her family, her capacity to accept help when it was offered with genuine care. And tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to tell her the truth about who he really was, and whether their friendship could survive the revelation that he had been living a lie since the day they met. The next morning at the hospital, Sam was awake and demanding pancakes, which the doctor assured them was an excellent sign of recovery. Grace sat by his bedside, reading him comics while Jake observed from a chair near the window. "Grace, who is that guy?" Sam whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Is he your boyfriend?" Grace blushed furiously. "He is my friend from college, Sam. He drove me here to see you." Sam studied Jake with a direct, curious gaze that only 10-year-olds could master. "Thanks for bringing my sister home, Jake. She worries about us too much." "I can see why she worries," Jake replied. "You scared everyone yesterday." "I am tougher than I look," Sam said with a grin that reminded Jake immediately of Grace. "Coach says I can still make All-Stars once I heal up." Dr. Martinez entered the room with Sam's discharge papers. "Young man, you are going to be just fine, but no baseball for 2 weeks while everything heals properly." Sam's face fell slightly, but he nodded obediently. "The good news," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that someone has taken care of your hospital bill. The financial office received an anonymous payment this morning that covers all surgery and hospital costs." Grace stared at the doctor in shock. "What do you mean, anonymous payment?" "Someone called early this morning and arranged to pay the full amount," Dr. Martinez explained. "They said they heard about Sam through the Little League community and wanted to help. Very generous people in Oklahoma, apparently." Jake kept his expression carefully neutral while Grace processed this information. He had called the hospital at 6 in the morning, identified himself as a friend of the Miller family, and arranged for payment using one of his credit cards. "I cannot believe this," Grace said, her voice full of wonder. "First all the scholarship opportunities for Tommy, then Luce's glasses program, then Sam's baseball sponsorship, and now this. It is like angels are watching over our family." Bill Miller nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother always said that kindness comes back to you when you need it most. Maybe all the good you do for others is finally circling back to bless our family." Jake felt a complex mixture of pride and guilt. He was helping deserving people who clearly needed assistance, but he was also deceiving Grace about his ability to provide that help. The anonymous payments felt both generous and dishonest. On the drive back to Austin, Grace was quiet for the first hour, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke. "Jake, I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Jake asked, keeping his eyes on the road. "All these wonderful things that have been happening to my family lately. The timing seems almost too good to be true." Jake felt his heart rate increase. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Tommy gets connected to the perfect scholarship program right after I mentioned his situation to you. Lucy gets referred to a vision program right after we talked about her needing glasses. Sam gets an anonymous sponsor for baseball, and now an anonymous benefactor pays his hospital bill." Grace turned in her seat to look at Jake directly. "Either my family is experiencing the most incredible string of coincidences in history, or someone has been helping us deliberately." Jake kept driving, his mind racing through possible responses. Maybe good things really do happen to good people. "Jake," Grace said softly, "are you helping my family?" The question hung in the air between them. Jake could lie, continue the deception, and maintain their friendship as it was. Or he could tell the truth and risk losing the most meaningful relationship he had ever experienced. Before he could answer, Grace continued, "Because if you are, I need you to know that while I appreciate the kindness more than I can express, I also need to understand why." Jake pulled off at the next rest stop and parked the car. He turned to face Grace, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the future of their friendship. "Grace, there is something I need to tell you about myself. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Grace waited, her expression open but serious. "My name is not really Jake Taylor," he began. "It is Jake Thompson. My father owns Thompson Technologies." Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. I was injured in a skiing accident at Aspen, Jake continued. I came to Austin Community College because I wanted to experience life without everyone knowing who my father was. I wanted to find out who I am when people are not trying to impress me or use me for connections. Jake took a deep breath. When I met you, you were the first person to see me as just another student who needed help. You did not care about my background or my family's money. You just saw someone who needed a friend. So you have been helping my family with your father's money, Grace said quietly. With my money, Jake corrected. I have my own accounts, my own resources. But yes, I arranged for Tommy's scholarship connections, Luce's eye program, Sam's baseball sponsorship, and the hospital payment. Grace was quiet for a long time, staring out the windshield at the highway traffic. Jake waited, prepared for her anger, her sense of betrayal, her rejection of his help and his friendship. Finally, Grace spoke. Why did not you just tell me the truth from the beginning? Because every friendship I have ever had has been affected by my family's money, Jake said. People either want something from me, or they treat me differently because of what I can provide. You were the first person to like me for who I am, not what I have. But you have been lying to me for months, Grace pointed out. I have, Jake admitted. And I am sorry for that. I should have trusted you with the truth. Grace turned to look at him. Jake, the reason I was suspicious was not because I am upset about the help. My family needed that assistance, and I am grateful beyond words. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I was suspicious because the person I have come to know over these months is exactly the kind of person who would help a friend's family if he had the resources to do so. The kindness, the generosity, the way you care about other people, that is who you are, regardless of your bank account. Jake felt tears he had not expected. So you are not angry. I am disappointed that you did not trust me with the truth, Grace said. But I am not angry about the help. My family has been blessed by your generosity, and that has allowed me to help other students in ways I never could before. Grace smiled for the first time since they had left the hospital. Besides, I figured out weeks ago that you were not just any ordinary student. What do you mean? Jake asked, surprised. Jake, you never complain about money, even though you claim to be living on a tight budget. You know about business and technology in ways that suggest significant exposure to both. And you carry yourself like someone who has never had to worry about basic necessities. Grace laughed softly. Plus, you rented a car and drove 8 hours to help my family without hesitation. Most college students cannot afford that kind of spontaneous generosity, even for their closest friends. Jake stared at her in amazement. You knew. I suspected, Grace clarified. But it did not matter to me who your father was or how much money your family had. What mattered was who you chose to be when you thought no one was watching. She reached across the console and took his hand. The person you have been these past months, the friend who listens to my problems and cares about my family, the student who struggles with his crutches but never gives up, that person is real, regardless of his trust fund. Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not realized he was carrying. I was so afraid you would think our entire friendship was built on deception. Our friendship is built on the fact that you chose to see me as a person worth knowing, and I chose to see you the same way, Grace said. Your family's money did not create the conversations we have shared or the way you have supported me through difficult times. That came from who you are inside. As they continued driving toward Austin, Jake realized that Grace had given him something more valuable than any business lesson or expensive education. She had shown him how to be worthy of the resources he had inherited, how to use privilege responsibly, and how to build relationships based on genuine care rather than mutual benefit. Did you expect Grace to react with such wisdom and forgiveness? Subscribe and comment to see how Jake and Grace's relationship evolves now that the truth is out in the open. The next chapters will show you the true power of honest friendship. Back in Austin, Jake and Grace's friendship entered a new phase of honesty and deeper connection. With the truth about his identity out in the open, Jake found himself able to share parts of his life he had kept hidden for months. I want to show you something, Jake said the day after their return from Oklahoma. Instead of meeting in the cafeteria, he had asked Grace to meet him at his apartment. Grace looked around the modest studio with surprise. Jake, this place is so small. Why are you living here when you could afford something much nicer? Jake sat down on his second-hand couch, adjusting his crutches against the wall. Because I needed to understand what life is like for people who do not have unlimited resources. My accident made me realize how insulated I had been from real life. He gestured around the sparse apartment. Living here, struggling with my crutches on campus, having to ask for help, it taught me things I never would have learned in a luxury high-rise. Grace sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. What kinds of things? That most people are dealing with challenges I never had to consider, Jake said. Financial stress, family responsibilities, working while going to school. That kindness is not something you buy or command. It is something you earn by how you treat others. Jake looked at Grace directly, and that the most valuable relationships are built on mutual respect and genuine care, not on what you can do for each other. Grace smiled. Those are important lessons. I learned them from watching you, Jake said. The way you help other students, support your family, work multiple jobs while maintaining excellent grades. You showed me what real strength looks like. Over the following days, Jake began sharing more about his previous life. He told Grace about Stanford, about his friends who had disappeared after his accident, about his former girlfriend who had left her engagement ring on his hospital bedside table. I thought I was popular, Jake explained during one of their lunch conversations. I thought people enjoyed my company. But when I could not throw expensive parties or take everyone on ski trips, they lost interest pretty quickly. Grace listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions about his experiences. Do you miss that life? Jake considered the question seriously. I miss some things. I miss my fraternity brothers, or at least I miss the people I thought they were. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere, without having to prove myself. He paused, stirring his soup thoughtfully. But I do not miss being surrounded by people who only cared about what I could provide. And I definitely do not miss being the kind of person who never had to think about anyone else's struggles. What do you mean? Grace asked. At Stanford, if I saw someone struggling with money or family problems or academic challenges, I could just write a check or make a phone call to fix their situation, Jake explained. I thought that made me generous, but really it just made me feel powerful. Jake looked at Grace with growing understanding. Helping your family taught me the difference between charity and compassion. Charity is about having resources and sharing them. Compassion is about seeing people's struggles and caring enough to find meaningful ways to help. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Is that why you chose to help my family anonymously instead of just offering to pay for everything directly? Partly, Jake admitted. I knew you would never accept direct financial help from someone you thought was a fellow student. But more than that, I realized that the way you help people preserves their dignity while addressing their needs. Jake continued. When you helped me carry my lunch tray, you did not make a big show of it or make me feel helpless. You just saw a practical problem and offered a simple solution. I wanted to help your family the same way. Over the next week, Grace introduced Jake to more of her world. She brought him to the community center, where she volunteered on weekends, teaching basic computer skills to older adults who needed help navigating the digital world. Jake watched Grace work with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who was trying to video call her grandchildren in Mexico, but could not figure out the technology. Do not worry, Mrs. Rodriguez, Grace said patiently. We will practice until it feels natural. Your granddaughter is going to be so excited to see you. Grace spent 4 to 5 minutes walking Mrs. Rodriguez through each step, celebrating small victories and gently correcting mistakes. When the call finally connected and Mrs. Rodriguez saw her granddaughter's face on the screen, both women started crying with joy. Grace has the patience of a saint, commented Miguel, the center coordinator, as Jake observed from across the room. Some of these folks have been trying to learn this technology for months, but they trust Grace to help them without making them feel stupid. Jake realized he was witnessing something remarkable. Grace's ability to meet people where they were and help them grow, rather than simply solving their problems for them. That evening, Jake made a proposal to Grace that he had been considering for weeks. I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no, Jake began, as they sat in his apartment sharing takeout Chinese food. Grace looked at him with curiosity. What is it? My family has the resources to do significant good in the world, Jake said. But I have learned that having money and using it wisely are completely different skills. He set down his chopsticks and turned to face her fully. You understand how to help people in ways that preserve their dignity and create lasting change. You see needs that I would never notice, and you connect people to resources in ways that empower them rather than creating dependence. Jake, what are you asking? Grace said gently. I am asking if you would consider partnering with me to create a foundation that helps people the right way, Jake said. Not just writing checks to feel good about ourselves, but actually connecting with communities to understand what they need and finding sustainable ways to provide support. Grace stared at him in surprise. You want me to help you give away money? I want you to help me learn how to use resources to create the kind of positive change you create every day, Jake clarified. The scholarship connections, the community programs, the way you help people help themselves. That is what real philanthropy should look like. Grace was quiet for a long time, considering his proposal. Jake, I do not know anything about running a foundation or managing large amounts of money. But you know everything about seeing people's real needs and finding meaningful ways to address them, Jake replied. The administrative stuff can be learned. The heart for service that you have, that cannot be taught. Grace smiled slowly. What kind of foundation are you thinking about? Jake felt his excitement building. Something focused on exactly the kinds of support that helped your family. Scholarship programs for first-generation college students. Community partnerships that connect families to resources they need. Support for students with disabilities who are navigating educational challenges. And programs that help people help themselves, rather than just providing handouts, Grace added, her voice growing more enthusiastic. Exactly, Jake said. Programs that recognize that most people do not need charity. They need opportunities and support to build the lives they want for themselves and their families. Grace looked at Jake with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of excitement, hope, and determination. I think I would like to be part of something like that. There's one more thing, Jake said, suddenly nervous. I would want you to be an equal partner, not just an employee or consultant. This foundation would belong to both of us, and all the major decisions would be made together. Grace's eyes widened. Jake, that is incredibly generous, but I cannot accept that kind of financial partnership. It is not about the money, Jake said firmly. It is about the vision. You have shown me what service really looks like, and I cannot imagine creating something meaningful without your perspective and leadership. Grace stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline while she processed his proposal. Finally, she turned back to face him. If we do this together, she said, it has to be based on the principle that every person with has dignity and wisdom that we need to respect. We cannot just impose solutions on people. We have to listen to what they actually need. Agreed, Jake said immediately. And we have to be accountable to the communities we serve, not just to our own good intentions, Grace continued. Absolutely. Grace smiled, and Jake knew she was about to say yes. Then I think we should start planning our foundation, partner. As they began sketching ideas on napkins, Jake realized that his accident, as painful as it had been, had led him to exactly where he needed to be. He had found not just a friend, but a partner who could help him use his family's resources to create the kind of positive change his mother would have been proud of. Their foundation would be built on everything Grace had taught him about seeing people's dignity, meeting them where they are, and helping them build the futures they envision for themselves. 6 months later, Jake stood in the conference room of the newly established Thompson Miller Foundation, watching Grace address a group of community leaders from across Texas. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Austin headquarters, illuminating Grace's face as she spoke passionately about their upcoming scholarship program. Our goal is not just to provide financial assistance, Grace explained to the assembled group. We want to create sustainable support systems that help first-generation college students succeed academically while staying connected to their communities. Jake smiled as he watched Grace command the room with quiet confidence. She wore a professional blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her hair was styled in a way that looked both polished and approachable. But what struck him most was how naturally she had grown into this leadership role. The foundation had officially launched 3 months ago, with Grace serving as executive director, while Jake handled the business and strategic planning aspects as managing director. They had started with 3 programs: the Opportunity Scholars Initiative for first-generation college students, the Community Vision Program that provided eye care for children in underserved areas, and the Adaptive Campus Project that improved accessibility for students with disabilities. "Jake, would you like to share the numbers from our pilot programs?" Grace asked, bringing his attention back to the presentation. Jake moved to the front of the room, his crutches now feeling like natural extensions of himself rather than obstacles to overcome. "In our first 6 months, we have connected 43 students to scholarship opportunities, provided vision care for over 200 children, and helped 15 college campuses improve their accessibility infrastructure." He clicked to the next slide, showing photos of program participants. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Tommy Miller, Grace's brother, just completed his freshman year at the University of Oklahoma with a 3.8 GPA. Lucy Miller made the honor roll every semester after receiving her glasses. Sam Miller was selected for the regional all-star team and has started a program to teach younger kids baseball fundamentals. The room buzzed with impressed murmurs. Jake continued, "These success stories are multiplying across every community we serve because we are not just providing temporary assistance. We are connecting people to sustainable resources and helping them build the lives they envision for themselves." After the presentation, Jake and Grace walked together through downtown Austin toward their favorite lunch spot, not the college cafeteria where they had first met, but a small restaurant that had become their regular meeting place for planning foundation business. "I think that went well," Grace said, her professional demeanor softening into the warm smile Jake had fallen in love with over the past few months. "You were incredible," Jake replied. "The way you talked about dignity and empowerment, you had them completely engaged." Grace laughed. "I never thought I would be comfortable speaking to groups of business leaders and community officials. A year ago, I was just trying to figure out how to afford textbooks." They settled into their usual table by the window, and Jake reached across to take Grace's hand. The simple gold band on her left ring finger caught the light, not his grandmother's elaborate diamond that Madison had left behind, but a ring they had chosen together that reflected Grace's understated elegance and practical nature. "Have you heard from your dad about the wedding plans?" Jake asked. Grace's face lit up immediately. "He called this morning. He is so excited about walking me down the aisle next month. And Sam has been practicing his ring-bearer duties with military precision." Jake grinned. "Tommy seemed nervous about giving a best man speech when I talked to him yesterday." "He will do fine," Grace assured him. "He has been working on it for weeks. Lucy helped him write it, and apparently it is very touching." Their engagement had surprised no one who knew them well. Jake had proposed 3 months ago, not with a grand gesture or expensive ring, but during one of their regular foundation planning meetings when Grace had suggested a program to help disabled students find meaningful work after graduation. "Grace," Jake had said, interrupting her presentation, "will you marry me?" Grace had stared at him in shock. "Right now, in the middle of a board meeting." "I love listening to your ideas," Jake had said. "I love watching you solve problems. I love how you see the best in everyone and find ways to help them see it too. I want to spend the rest of my life being amazed by your heart and your mind." Grace had said yes before he even pulled out the ring. Now, as they planned their wedding and their foundation's expansion, Jake reflected on how completely his life had changed since that first day in the Austin Community College cafeteria. His relationship with his father had grown stronger as Richard Thompson watched his son find purpose and direction. "Your mother would be so proud," Richard had told Jake during their last phone call. "She always believed that our wealth was meant to serve others, and you have found a way to honor that belief." Jake's old friends from Stanford had gradually reconnected as word spread about the foundation's work. Some reached out with genuine interest in contributing to their programs, while others seemed motivated by social climbing considerations. Jake had learned to tell the difference and invest his time accordingly. But the most meaningful change was in Jake himself. The anger and self-pity that had consumed him after his accident had been replaced by a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. His crutches no longer felt like symbols of limitation, but reminders of the journey that had led him to grace and to work that mattered. "I have been thinking about something," Grace said, interrupting his reflections. What is that? Jake asked. I want to expand the Adaptive Campus project to include emotional and social support, not just physical accommodations, Grace said. Students with disabilities often struggle with isolation and self-doubt as much as they struggle with stairs and narrow doorways. Jake nodded thoughtfully. What did you have in mind? Peer mentorship programs, Grace explained. Pairing students who are successfully navigating college with disabilities with incoming students who are just starting their journeys. Creating spaces for connection and community building. I love it, Jake said immediately. Students helping students, building the kind of supportive community that makes all the difference. Grace smiled. We could start with a pilot program at Austin Community College. Full circle from where we met. Speaking of full circle, Jake said, I heard from Dr. Martinez yesterday. She wants to nominate you for the Community Service Award from the Austin Chamber of Commerce. Grace blushed. Jake, that is too much. I am just doing work I believe in. That is exactly why you deserve recognition, Jake replied. You have created programs that are changing hundreds of lives, but you still see it as simply helping people who need support. Their conversation was interrupted by a young woman approaching their table hesitantly. Excuse me, she said, are you Grace Miller from the Thompson Miller Foundation? Grace looked up with immediate attention. I am. How can I help you? The young woman smiled nervously. My name is Sarah Chen. I am starting at UT in the fall with support from your Opportunity Scholars program. I just wanted to thank you personally for believing in students like me. Grace stood up and hugged Sarah warmly. Sarah, I am so excited for you. How are you feeling about starting college? Scared but excited, Sarah admitted. My parents never went to college, so this is all new territory for our family. You are going to do wonderfully, Grace assured her. And remember, you can always reach out to our office if you need any support during your first year. After Sarah left, Jake looked at Grace with the same wonder he felt every time he watched her interact with the people they served. That is the 15th student who has stopped you on the street to say thank you, Jake observed. The work we do matters to them, Grace replied simply. That makes it matter to me. Jake realized that Grace had taught him the difference between success and significance, between achievement and purpose, between having influence and making an impact. As they walked back to their foundation offices, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them together. His accident had seemed like the end of everything he had planned for his life, but it had actually been the beginning of everything that truly mattered. He had lost the use of his legs temporarily, but he had gained perspective permanently. He had lost friends who only cared about his status, but he had found a partner who loved him for who he was becoming. He had lost a future built on entitlement and privilege, but he had gained a purpose built on service and compassion. Most importantly, he had learned that true wealth was not about what you could afford to buy, but about what you chose to do with the resources entrusted to your care. That evening, as they worked late in their foundation offices reviewing applications for their next round of scholarship recipients, Grace looked up from her computer. Jake, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had never come to Austin Community College? Jake considered the question seriously. I think I would have eventually become successful in business, probably taken over my father's company, made a lot of money. He paused, looking at Grace across their shared workspace. But I would never have learned how to use success to create something meaningful. I would never have understood the difference between being served and serving others. Jake stood up and walked around the desk to where Grace was sitting. And I definitely would never have met the person who taught me that the best things in life come not from what you can afford, but from what you choose to give. Grace smiled and stood to meet him, and Jake realized that his journey from entitled heir to purposeful partner was complete. He had found not just love, but a calling that would define the rest of their lives together. Their foundation would continue growing, touching thousands of lives and creating ripple effects of kindness that would spread far beyond anything they could imagine. But the real success was simpler and more profound. Two people who had learned to see past surface appearances to recognize the dignity and potential in everyone they met. Jake's crutches leaned against the wall, no longer symbols of limitation, but reminders of the journey that had led him home.